Welcome to Catalyst Conversations, the podcast that brings you real-world stories and solutions from a wide variety of acoustic experts. Each episode, we'll dive into a different topic from the world of acoustics, such as architectural and industrial noise control, seismic and vibration restraint, acoustical testing, or innovative design and engineering of sound control products. Our experts have decades of experience in this space and are eager to share their expertise with you. Join us in making the world a quieter place.
Hello, and welcome to Catalyst Conversations. For today's episode, we explore a crucial aspect of design that often goes unnoticed, designing for the experience, not just the appearance, when creating spaces. This episode will cover how architects and interior designers need to consider noise and sound control in their projects to ensure functionality and comfort. My name is Adam Ritzak, and I will serve as the moderator for the discussion. We'll be joined by Dave Novak from Ketchum and Walton, where Dave is an acoustical sales representative, and Jason Ehrlich, a Kinetics Noise Control product expert in sound absorption, where he serves the room acoustics and home theater markets. Let's get started with today's conversation. All right, thanks everybody for joining us for this episode. We have several interesting topics that will be on the list to cover, and we're lucky to be able to be joined by Dave and Jason to have their expertise shared with us throughout today's conversation. So before we dive into the topics, let's just start with a quick introduction for you both. Dave, I'll turn this over to you first.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks for having me. Dave Novak with the Ketchum and Walton Company. Just a little bit about us. We're an independent employee-owned company based out of Central Ohio here in Columbus. And we have several offices here throughout the Northeast, and we're proud to represent and work with Kinetics Noise Control and all the Catalyst brand companies. And it's a great partnership. A little bit about my experience. I'm a outside sales rep for architectural and acoustical solutions. I call directly on architects, designers, consultants, engineers, and help them try to make the best decisions possible on various types of projects. So I've got some experience certainly in our marketplace and elsewhere, and we've had the benefit and fortune of working with some great customers and clients here in our territory.
All right, thanks. And Jason.
Hi, my name is Jason Ehrlich with Kinetics Noise Control. If you're just now finding out about Kinetics, I think our biggest claim to fame is that we manufacture more different types of noise control products than any other manufacturer out there. I just hit my 25-year anniversary last month. A lot of that time was spent in our noise control side of things, talking about noise control floors, walls, and ceilings. And my role there was to be the primary liaison between consultants, architects, contractors, reps, and our own draftsmen to make sure that the design got implemented. So it was a wonderful education. The last few, maybe 5-8 years, I have done the educational role in business development. So I go out and do a lot of talks to architects through AIA and other educational efforts.
All right, great. Thanks a lot. So first up today, pivoting to our list of topics that we have here, let's talk about the need for architects and designers to not only focus just on aesthetics, but also the experience in the space overall.
Yeah. This is a great talking point, and this is something that I touch on when I get involved with Lunch and Learns. And really, the messaging here from our perspective is that as an architect and designer approaching various types of projects, we often see them designing for the eyes, but not designing for the ears. We ultimately want to change that mindset and have people focusing not only just designing for our eyes, designing for our ears, and designing for all our senses. That's the ears seem to be one sense that gets overlooked on various projects, and we look forward to talking more about those types of projects here as we go further onto the podcast. But really, again, shift in mindset and your approach on projects is something that's certainly important in our mind.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a push in the last few years, I think brought upon by a building code requiring noise control for multifamily. And so I think the design group has never been more engaged, but now I kind of feel we need to tweak that so that they're understanding that more different types of projects require noise treatment and abatement, and then even fine-tuning that to a different degree. Because I think we've got the word out there, but as Dave was kind of saying, we need to kind of tune that in so that room is actually functioning the way it should acoustically.
Yeah, and this is something that I encourage A&D to engage with their clients when they're designing a project and talk about the acoustic expectations. How do you want the space to look? How do you want the space to feel? Do you want to hear noise? Do you want to hear no noise? Because in a building, there's a few things that make noise. It's people, it's mechanical equipment, and it's outside noise coming in. If we think about that from our design approach and certainly understand what the needs are of the specific business segments or the users in the building, we can make decisions on how to make them more comfortable.
All right, great. Another thing here, just thinking about this, what are some key considerations you think are important for designing with sound control in mind?
Well, I think back to the drawing board is who are we designing it for, and how will the space be used? I was recently at the doctor's office, and multiple exam rooms. The place is a factory. There's probably 12, 15 exam rooms, and I'm in one exam room, and I can hear the doctor talking to the patient in the room next to me. So right there is a prime example of understanding what the needs are of the business, understanding what privacy means, understanding what crosstalk means, and how can we deal with that accordingly. And there's in healthcare, there's certainly HIPAA privacy laws that are in place to protect the patient's privacy, but that doesn't seem to get extended into the design and construction of private offices or private exam rooms. We have to do a better job of educating the design teams on what options and solutions are available to treat that particular case.
Yeah, I think to put a finer point on it, if you look at the example of houses of worship, you got a lot of acoustic challenges there because you have, speech that's involved in the sermon, but you also have music. But how you approach rock style music is going to be very different than how you might approach traditional. So even that's where that feel really does matter. And we do have to know those things to tune that space properly, because we can do that now.
Yeah, and we're starting to see a shift of more spaces are reverting to contemporary worship. And what does that mean? Well, that means a full drummer, a live band, and low frequencies, long wavelengths. And we can certainly deal with that. We can treat the space. People are converting more traditional worship spaces into contemporary, and that's creating an opportunity for the acoustics market. But some of these spaces are large gyms. They are maybe they're community spaces. Maybe it's their traditional worship space being transitioned over. And Kinetics has a great suite of products to help tune that space. And again, engaging in a rep and talking to a rep or a consultant when you're designing these spaces is certainly important.
To follow up on that, you guys really explained a lot about the space and how different people can be impacted by that, those considerations. But what are some things to consider when you think about the wall construction and materials overall as well?
We can talk about the worship space for a moment there. In we take a step back. What the primary business responsibility is to send the message and spread the word. And if we have a really highly reflective room and acoustically reflective, a high reverberation time, people aren't going to hear the message. The message isn't going to get out. The spoken word's not going to be heard. So the application of proper acoustic finishes will give us speech intelligibility, will give us music clarity, and ultimately create a great experience for all the users in there.
I think too, when you get into wall construction on that, it's critical to get that construction right in the planning stages. To do high performance noise control requires extra space, and it's really expensive to come back in and add it later. And I know one mistake I see a lot is a lot of architects and designers will specify wall to ceiling absorption in a noisy mechanical room. Absorption does very little to stop that noise from going through. That's really treating the reverb in that space. It doesn't stop the noise from going through. So it's critical to understand what the concerns are and then applying it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing your sources up front, applying a solution that's going to block sound. I see that quite a bit in mechanical rooms. You walk in there and in floor to ceiling acoustic treatments, and you can't help but chuckle a little bit. But they tried. They didn't have a resource to reach out to and to support their decision making.
Yeah, I always say the maintenance person really appreciates that, but if the maintenance person's in there, the machinery's probably not even running anyway. So,
Dave, you brought up something earlier that I think is interesting, and hoping we can expand on that a bit. Obviously, different project sizes will matter in terms of what's available and resources available. But what are your thoughts about how to best utilize experts throughout the process?
Well, engaging with an expert early on is going to be the best approach. If the project has the budget, I would suggest reaching out to a consultant to help them make the best decisions. But we find ourselves and there's a lot of markets throughout the country that aren't consultant rich. And now we'll just say in Ohio, for example, there's not a lot of acoustical consultants here. There's a few. We get leaned on quite a bit for project advice. What should I do in this situation? What should I do in that situation? And thankfully, we've been involved in so many projects over the years. We know what works. We know how it works. We know what products to apply, and we can be that resource. But not everybody has, that good rep in their backyard, so to speak. And again, engaging in people, identifying those noise sources, potential noise sources early, and coming up with an action plan to deal with them accordingly is always the best approach.
yeah, I think Dave hit it on the head. One of my lines is, dog kennels need acoustic treatment, as do performing arts centers. Dog kennels are going to be a little bit easier to handle with some pretty basic stuff, where performing arts, maybe is where you definitely want to bring in a consultant. But anywhere in between, they don't always have the budget for it. I know Dave, as well as Kinetics, we're happy to provide a reverberation report, which is the beginning of the conversation, definitely not the end. Performing arts, you definitely should be talking to a consultant, but anything under that, running that reverb report will give you an idea of just what the situation is, how bad it is, and then we can start talking about different ways to treat it.
I see from my day-to-day over the last several years, I see a lot of poor decisions being made with regards to wall construction. So sound transmission from room to room. And that's something that really is quite frustrating. But people love to, I should say, architects love to build a standard wall with 3-inch metal studs, one layer of 5/8 drywall on each side, maybe some insulation in the middle, and call it a day. Well, that's a very low performing wall construction. That's in the low 40s. And you can hear speech, you can hear music directly transmit through that wall construction or that wall type. And that's something that, again, it's quite frustrating because I see that everywhere. And I see that in doctors' offices. I see that in co-working spaces. I see that in police station interrogation rooms, even classrooms, various private offices, and people expect that wall to perform at a high level and because it's everywhere. And unfortunately, it's not the greatest wall assembly ever. And one of the things that I kind of always revert to is the Kinetics ISOMAX clip, because it's really allowing them to hit the easy button when it comes to wall construction. You can take a 40 wall to a 57 very simply by adding an isolation clip with some furring channel on a layer of drywall, and you have a perfectly decoupled, isolated wall. You start building up that assembly. Maybe you go to 2 layers, you take that into the 60s, and the transmission loss increases from there. But there's not an easier solution to increase your STC rating of a wall assembly by using the ISOMAX clip. And that's something that we go to all the time. And people don't realize how easy it is to use such a product, and it's practically foolproof.
Reminds me, Dave, of one of my favorite stories. You and I met out on the east side of Columbus in someone's apartment. We met with the architect and the contractor, and there was some music playing on the other side of the wall. And right there on the table was the art drawings, and it said STC 50 wall. And as soon as that music came on, the architect just put his hand in his face and was just shaking his head. And we had to explain that they probably had a 50. The 50 is not very good.
Yeah.
They thought they were doing the right thing. They really, really did. But they didn't use the ISOMAX clip. And I love telling that story because they did try to do the right thing. They just didn't understand that just because it's code doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be functional for the particular environment that they're building it in.
Maybe some architects they're just not familiar with the technology and how easy it is to apply, and they go to a standard wall construction. But we just have to be better at educating the team and informing them of how how simple it is and how cost effective it is. And it doesn't add much of a dollar per square foot to the wall construction by any means.
Dave, earlier you mentioned about action items to consider coming from this, and I'm curious just to get both your thoughts here on what you think some real key calls to action would be to architects and designers based on some of the topics we covered today, or maybe other items that we haven't gone in depth about.
Yeah, from a call to action, really get to know your acoustical sales reps in your market and get educated by them and build some trust and work with them on projects and get to know them on every project. I think is a key call to action. Use their expertise. I tell them all the time, lean on me, call me anytime. We'll help you make the right decisions. We'll help you get on the right track. And it's just not me trying to sell you a product. I'm trying to be a true partner. And that's the way we approach every project is by being a partner. If there's a better way to do it, if there's another product or solution that could potentially be used, I'll help you get there. And I won't be afraid to tell you. Develop relationships with your reps in your territories is one of the most important things.
I think my big one is maybe examine your comfort space. I'm on a personal mission to talk about the NRC standard. When I go out and talk to architects, they're all very, very comfortable with NRC. And if you're not familiar, it's basically a measurement of how well a product absorbs different sound. The problem with it is it's really only designed for speech frequencies. It's not really designed to talk about music. And I think that architects are very comfortable with NRC, and they just see a product out there and they think the higher the number is, the better it is. And it's really not true when it comes to doing things like treating things like music. In fact, adding those types of products can take all the high frequencies out of a space, leave behind the mid frequencies and low frequencies, and actually make the room sound worse. Again, they're trying to do the right thing. They think they understand that NRC is just a carry-all for all things acoustics, and it really isn't. And I think that gets back to what Dave's been saying. Reach out, talk to us, maybe examine, where those thoughts are coming from with NRC, because if there's music involved, you should not be looking at that standard more than likely.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the NRC doesn't tell the whole story. Most architects and designers don't understand, the meaning of all that, or even an end user. And I was just recently on a project where it was a worship space. They called me and said, we've tried acoustic panels and they're not working. And I visited the space and I saw about 5 acoustic panels on the wall. They're all but maybe a half-inch thick, 4x4 panels directly attached to the wall. And we're talking about a 1,500 square foot space. They immediately had the perception that the panels weren't working, but in fact, they did not have the right product, the right thickness, nor the right quantities. And that's where we can help steer you in the right direction, because if we're working on a worship space that has a full band, so to speak, then those lower frequencies have longer wavelengths, and we need thicker materials to absorb those longer wavelengths.
And the other, we've come out with newer products like our VTLF and Versatune, where we can do a lot of different things with composite layups and not necessarily have to go to a 4-inch thick panel. We can do things in less, depending, again, what's the space, what's the purpose of the space, what level are we trying to take the quality of the acoustics to.
All right, guys. Well, thanks. I think that's super valuable for everybody. Any other topics you'd like to address that we haven't touched on today, or any closing thoughts to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would love to talk a little bit about speech privacy and crosstalk. And here's something that I run into every day as well. There's so many different applications out there. It's kind of hard to begin at one particular application or project type. We talked earlier about multifamily residential spaces. There's a growing need for some additional education there as we start to, at least in our market, we have a lot of stick build, and the wood is all connected together. As we know, it's all glued and screwed together, and sound transmits through these structures very easily. Building code is not great either. It's STC 50, IIC 50. This is an application that I see quite overlooked all the time with basic wall construction. Nothing upsets me more than going to a project or speaking with a homeowner that spent a lot of money on a space, on a unit, and they can hear the residents above us, below us, next to us. And the importance for proper wall, floor, and ceiling design and construction is very, very important in these spaces. If you're an architect and designer, try to understand these building code requirements and reach out to a rep to help you make the proper decisions, or even a consultant. I see a lot of co-working spaces. So they're popping up everywhere around here. And these types of spaces have that 3-inch metal stud that we were talking about between offices. A lot of crosstalk. There's zero speech privacy. And these are spaces where people don't want to hear their neighbors. What I'm seeing a lot of is this partial height wall construction, meaning the wall only goes up just beyond the acoustic ceiling tile. Well, how do we deal with that? There's a great crosstalk product that we use quite a bit. It's the Kinetics Quiet Tile. Conventional acoustic ceiling tile is made to be acoustically transparent. The sound needs to travel through it. And what happens when you have offices next to each other is that you created a scenario with a partial height wall where the sound travels through the ceiling up and over the wall and into the adjacent space. Again, a great application for the quiet tile. We also have to be aware of our supply and return air. Kinetics has silencers that can deal with your return air openings. And maybe in this application too, we can add the Isomax clip to the wall to increase the transmission loss of the wall to give you some further privacy between rooms. But those applications, along with doctor's office, exam rooms, even classrooms, we need to pay more attention to STC ratings and those types of specifications when we are designing and developing projects.
My little add-on would be, when we talk about STC, we talk about IIC, which I find architects to be less familiar with. While they're getting comfortable with those things, I think they go online to our website. We have a great library of tests, and they just see an assembly and they say, well, that's an STC 55. That meets code. I'm going to put it in, without understanding how sound can flank around it in the walls, which is a big concern. Believe it or not, it's actually part of building code in parts of Canada, just not for some reason in the United States. Well, if you don't treat that noise and it can move through the wall around your sound assembly, you can devastate the performance of that assembly. So I think that's something else to keep in mind. I think we've done a good job educating on what STC is. I don't know that we've done a good job saying there are certain rules you have to do to make sure you maintain what that assembly will perform like.
Yeah, and I agree too. You talked about NRC doesn't tell the whole story. IIC doesn't tell the whole story as well. And below 250 hertz, I think there's a lot of acousticians out there that want to see the testing maybe changed or tweaked slightly to account for some of those lower frequencies. But you're right, IIC doesn't get brought up much, but it is equally important to STC in those types of spaces.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. And thanks for sharing your thoughts and recommendations and experiences and everything. I think it's going to be really valuable for our audience today. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Appreciate being on here.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about Ketchum and Walton and Kinetics Noise Control, you can do so by visiting each company's website. That's at ketchumandwalton.com and kineticsnoise.com. Be sure to subscribe to Catalyst Conversations, and if you've been enjoying these discussions, we'd love it if you could leave us a review to help others in the industry learn more about our podcast. Stay tuned for more episodes as we continue to explore noise and sound control advancements shaping the future of industries worldwide.